have a wonderful group of members that have helped organize this webinar. They are all members of a group in CII called our Supply Chain Management Community of Business Advancement. We refer to them as the Supply Chain CBA. These leaders all get together on the second Thursday of every month. It's a virtual meeting. They meet at 8:30 Central. And we will be meeting in San Antonio face-to-face on Monday, July 31st. If you're interested in more information about this group, my info is available on the website at CII. You can certainly reach out. My name is Jenny. I can connect you with any of these resources. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague, Mike Pappas. He is a member of CII with Triad National Security through Los Alamos National Labs, and he will be your moderator today. He's going to briefly introduce you to our panelists and walk you through the presentation today. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We hope you will find the information useful. I'm Mike Pappas from Triad National Security, and I'll be your moderator today. Our expert panelists are Allison Bradley from Ontario Power Generation, Keith Churchill from Bechtel, Ashwan Dogan from Hilti, Patrick Duke from Wood, and Ernie Mashner from Victaulic. So why are we here? CII is the recognized leader in applied research and industry engagement to promote best practices in capital projects. At the last annual conference, an interactive panel on supply chain asked a 400-person audience various questions related to their experiences and perceptions of the recent supply chain disruptions. Our panelists today will address many of the unanswered questions from last year's Q&A session and will share their thoughts and experience on what early proactive supplier engagement means to them and what it should look like. Through specific implementation examples, they will demonstrate how enablers like advanced work packaging and integrated project delivery methods can help better integrate supply chain functions into the overall project execution workstream. Now I'm going to ask Ernie to remind us of the survey results from last summer's annual conference.
Great, thanks, Mike. Thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. Just to rewind where we were in August, we could advance the slide, please. So we did an interactive Menti survey where we were polling the audience with questions. You can see we were predominantly owners, which is terrific and a great function of CII as we get owners and builders together. So watch these colors. We'll be seeing them throughout the rest of the presentation. Just ask an open-ended question. What is the current sentiment? And you see things challenging, frustrating, uncertain. And for an industry that wants to manage our risk and reduce uncertainty, this is the prevalent theme with supply chain disruptions. First question was, who should own the risk for the supply chain disruptions? And again, our audience was comprised of the best practitioners in large capital project deliveries. Overwhelming response is that these risks should be shared, whether it is a pandemic, whether it's a regional conflict, whether it's local weather patterns. This was a good indicator of where we're going with our conversation. We asked what type of supply chain disruptions were experienced, and we saw things, quotes having a short validity or even spot pricing. High price increases, which we defined as being more than a 25% price increase within 6 months prior to a PO execution, and then extended delivery times. I think this was a common theme throughout most of the supply chain. You know, whether it's commodities, whether it's engineered equipment, we were seeing a lot of longer delivery times than we have historically seen. One item to point out here, of the respondents in this survey, nobody said they had no issues. So everybody was impacted in some fashion. Next. Open-ended question. What other types of things have you experienced? And you know, trying to manage a large capital project and not getting a bid for a critical element can be difficult, and it can increase risk. What CII is all about, the member is trying to reduce risk on large capital projects. escalation, quality issues, and even bankruptcy with some firms in supply chain throughout the capital project. This was an interesting question in that firms were saying that the supply chain disruptions actually affected their ability and their decisions when they were doing their go no go phase to actually pursue projects, which is something that few people have seen historically within our industry. Some of the mitigations, and again, bringing it back to why we're here today. Early procurement was the overwhelming best mitigation for supply chain issues. And if you look at the colors of the dots here, this is the whole spectrum. This is owners, the EPC firms, suppliers, and owners felt that early procurement, again, this is a proactive response as opposed to a reactive. The reactive responses are to change the material and supplier, but you're already within the delivery of your project to do that. So, excuse me. So the early procurement was the overwhelming proactive method of mitigating supply chain disruptions. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Other things, some felt that divine intervention was necessary for to deliver projects better, but incentives, advanced work packaging, and this all ties in with the principles of early supply chain engagement, advanced work packaging, early collaboration. All of these different terms basically mean the same thing. Again, within our audience, we asked how many were actively using. Overwhelmingly, we had yes, and again, this is owners, the firms, all the supply chain were using early proactive supplier engagement, advanced work packaging, all of these tools. How can supply chain help? At Victaulic, we are a member of the supply chain. Transparency, communication, collaboration, collaborate, honesty. All of these things, again, tie into the collaborative nature of early supply chain engagement, which our panelists are going to be providing some good examples for today. Going forward, what do people think is going to happen? When will it end? Uncertainty, inflation. Certainly inflation is a disruption that took place in the later part of the pandemic over the last 18 months. It's still going on. So we want to look at tools, and hopefully we'll provide you some tools today to help manage this uncertainty and reduce risk on projects. Panel thought that nobody thought that we were almost out of it. Again, this was back in August, so we're 6 months past this. Majority of the firms across the spectrum felt that we were still 1 to 2 years out from getting back to some sense of normalcy. Back to Mike.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to start off with our owner panelist. Allison, you've been involved in several projects executed using the Integrated Project Delivery Approach, or IPD. How does IPD address some of the issues we are seeing with the supply chain? And do you have any specific recommendations for your owner colleagues on how to best implement IPD?
So I would say for IPD or I2PD or any kind of collaborative contracting models, it really brings all of the suppliers together early in a project concept phase. And it creates that team approach in design and planning the work. So from my experience with a pilot I2PD project, working together early helps to reduce scope creep and change orders. And it provides one schedule for all parties. The design and field quality is improved, and we're even able to design like a component on that pilot to address some unusual structural issues that were going on at site. So I would say for initial I2PD conversations or IPD or collaborative contracts, when you go to have that conversation within your organization, there's about 5 key elements that you want to have kind of in play before a pilot project, and that's executive desire to improve, executive support of change, cross-functional education and awareness of I2PD, working with trusted business partners, and then a knowledgeable third-party collaborative contracting facilitator. So I'll just circle back just to give you a little bit about what each of those means, but that desire to improve you have to honestly look at your project performance with your executives and really be transparent on how things are going, because there are gaps, right? And you need to review the industry data and share that research data on collaborative contracting models. So lay it out for them so they actually want to improve and can see that these kinds of models will help you. And then on the executive support of change, you have to support the organization to take a risk and move away from traditional contracting models that our legal and our supply chain and our project offices are really comfortable with, and support that team in letting go of that. There's a false sense of security that fixed price and lump sum give us, and collaborative contract models are transparent, and there's shared risks and rewards there. So it's different, and people need to be ready to try something different. On the education and awareness of I2PD or IPD, it's education and familiarity for the people to be able to adopt it. And that education has to be done across your organization, and especially with the team members that are going to be involved in it. They have to feel comfortable so they can anticipate the next steps. And then having a trusted business partners working with you on these new contracts. It is transparent and it's very collaborative. It has to be fully integrated across all the suppliers. So you need to work with people that you actually are very familiar with and have trust already. And that helps with buy-in to try it with you. So it really does strengthen the relationship, though, when you go through something like this. And then the third-party collaborative contracting facilitator, it helps to bring in an expert to help you, the team, the suppliers. It also gives reassurance to your executives that the integration and collaboration tools and that you're selecting for the project will actually be executed appropriately, and they just keep you on track. And I just say the last advice is to choose a project that will give you an opportunity to repeat the work. And repeat the I2PD or IPD process. We ended up selecting an 8-turbine generator overhaul at Otto Holden Hydroelectric Generating Station. And that repetitive aspect of this project, going from one unit to another, helps you to learn the I2PD concepts and improve how you use those tools. And it ingrains that process so you become more familiar.
All right, thank you very much. Patrick, you've had extensive experience in integrating and onboarding suppliers into your organization and your projects. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've done that, what key considerations need to be considered, and what are some things to watch out for?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think with the post-pandemic or however you want to describe it, situation in the supply chain relationship with our suppliers across the industry, one of the problems that we have is that we're not vetting the slew of new suppliers that we've seen come into the business, and we're also not paying close attention to sort of the spread of the OEM product that's been distributed throughout the industry, and so it's not only early procurement, I think, that matters most. It's also very early engagement, outside of just your finance issues and your quality, surveys and trying to figure out what their best practices are for your suppliers. We oftentimes focus primarily when construction work packages go out. We spend a good amount of effort on price, and we sort of neglect the deliverable, especially if it's early on in a project for budgetary pricing, for example. So we have to watch out for over promises and just continue that engagement with our suppliers, develop these new relationships, because, as Allison mentioned, it's important to keep those relationships that you've already built with your strong suppliers on a project level. But I think we also don't need to negate a lot of the newer players. They provide a lot of expertise sometimes, especially on regional project levels, that you're not able to, you're not always going to get from some of your largest suppliers in the business. So paying attention to things like that, having those early dialogues, making sure that as you're doing the onboarding, when you decide to award or start a conversation with the new supplier, you need to figure out how you're going to hold these suppliers to the project schedule. Ernie mentioned earlier on this call that, the whole industry is having problems with extended delivery and extended price. These are conversations that, early on a project level, you tend to be really focused on price. And sometimes if it's a really long project, you can really lose track of those deliverables. And those deliverables are changing constantly. I think we've all seen that as we're dealing with new suppliers and onboarding them. So you got to make sure that that's part of that conversation early on in the process, early on in that relationship, and then establish ways to sort of babysit the project, babysit the product and what it is you're doing, and making sure you're collaborating with not just the suppliers themselves, but with your project team, with your engineering team, and sort of work together as a concise unit. So from my experience, I think that's really the best way to go about, not just the onboarding process, but really it's that onboarding a new relationship or an existing relationship on a project level.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
I forgot to mention for all the attendees, in the control panel, you'll see a questions bar. And in that, you can submit questions for our panelists, and we'll address those at the end. Ashwan, as a sustainability strategist for Hilti Corporation, what do you see on the horizon related to sustainability? And how can localization and regionalization of suppliers help address supply chain risks and help achieve sustainability targets?
Well, Mike, I think to answer that, it's important to highlight one topic, right? Sustainability is no longer just a topic for businesses to sustain their license to operate, but also for humankind to, continue living on this planet. And what's very important to always keep in mind is our industry construction sector is responsible for around 40% of the energy consumption and around 50% of the total resource consumption in this planet. So on the horizon, there are 4 very big topics that we are seeing when it comes to sustainability. One of the first one is energy efficiency, and we are not very, this is not something new, right? Energy efficiency has been around. It starts with the buildings. It's how much we consume energy. So it is out there, but nowadays it's really about what is the energy source that we are using. So that's for the future. Secondly is net zero buildings. And net zero buildings are really starting with the trends of the sustainable construction materials. You can think of it like green steel nowadays is a huge topic. Secondly, it's the biodegradable materials or the materials of the future overall. Then the third one, very big trend, and it's not only about construction, but everyone is going around this one, is the circular economy. It's really about nowadays how can we reduce our waste, because as construction sector is consuming so much material, how can we reduce our dependency on raw materials as well as the virgin materials? So trying to become more circular rather than having this linear economy approach of, take, make, waste. So it's no longer that, it's rather than how can we become more circular. So for construction, it's a little bit more like design for disassembly approach. And last but not least, but always been around, is a health and well-being topic. Health and well-being is really about the user health and safety when it comes to within the constructing stage, but also well-being of the occupants or the people that are staying, working, or living in these buildings. So when we consider all these 4 big topics and trends, these are not only the trends that, let's say, we are seeing as the consumers, but we are hearing from the governments, meaning that regulations are coming. It's going to become one of the compliance issue. So as companies, when we start to work on our own sustainability strategy, one of the first things that we need to understand is what are the risks that our businesses are facing. And to truly understand that, we need to then work with our suppliers. And I really like the question that you asked, for example, localization and regionalization. This is one of the examples we can take, right? take the example of when we are working with local or regional suppliers, it truly helps us, first of all, to reduce the overall transportation emission. Instead of bringing from one side of the world, you're working with the local suppliers. Secondly, you're actually opening the options to make your work more circular, because then it is much more easy to collaborate and work with your suppliers to understand what can we do at the end of lifetime of these products or the overall material that you take from your suppliers that can also help them to remanufacture, repurpose, or requantify the materials that they have already put into the market. And last but not least, of course, it helps us definitely to reduce the environmental risks that are with this transportation that are happening when we are working with, suppliers that are quite far away. And I think one of the biggest example is what has happened recently in Ohio, right? These type of transportation accidents can not only affect environment, but also the population around these cities, around these projects. So when it comes to how to integrate and how to engage our own suppliers, I truly start with saying one thing. What gets measured gets improved. And sustainability is it's the same. So when you start working with your supplier, I think one of the first things that we need to do is create this transparency, as many of us already said, collaboration. And how to do that, setting up roundtables. It's no longer one supplier against the other, but rather than how can we make everyone work together and share best use cases, best strategies, best example. And once we do that one, we need to start collecting data on sustainability, because it's definitely going to help us to achieve our own goals, but also deliver the projects for our customers at a better level. As I said, one of the trend is net zero buildings or net zero construction. So when we are able to prove that, how we did it, it starts with creating sustainability, not only in our own business, but throughout our supply chain. So I hope it answers.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate that answer. Keith, your EPC organization has longstanding sophisticated supply chain processes. Do these current processes effectively allow for the incorporation of innovation while still ensuring that risk is being managed and mitigated? Can you provide a specific example?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. First of all, it's really great to be back to discuss this topic after the national conference. It was such an interesting topic there, and this question is a really good question, but I think that my answer really centers around the fact that innovation can't be done in a silo. And I feel like if we get into the procurement process overall, no matter if it's simple or if it's complicated, we've already missed the opportunity to innovate, right? I think that as we look at innovation, depending on where it's coming from, whether it's coming from an internal source or whether it's coming from an external supplier, it has to be approached as a team effort, right? So you have to take a look at the different solutions that a supplier can bring to the table, and really identify the ones that are going to provide the most value for your projects, and then identify what's the level of effort to get it across the finish line. You have to work with projects on the project side of the fence to help and make sure that they're acceptable to the idea, that they see the value, and that they're going to be the ones to own and drive it in the field. You have to work with the engineering staff to really understand what's the impact to the deliverables that we're required to put out for construction and for procurement to go and buy these components or technologies that we're looking at. So if it's a newer technology and it hasn't been proven by a code board or ACI or whatever it is, it's obviously a little bit farther down the line than if it's something that's already approved. We just need to leverage it. So what's the level of effort and how many additional hours is it going to take to get into the engineering design? And then, once we get to the procurement phase, it's really just getting procurement on board with the understanding of, hey, this solution might cost a little bit more. But at the end of the day, we're not looking at just the overall price of the widget. We're looking at the total value chain across the EPC industry. And as we look at that, as we look at total installed costs from a constructor's perspective, we also need to start taking a look at operations and maintenance costs. And so you bring the client into the discussion as well, because they're the ones that have to operate and maintain the facility. So how does that affect the long-term operational costs of the project as well? And I really appreciated the I2PD discussion from Olivia earlier, just because it brings all of the people to the table. They have a centralized goal. They've got a centralized mindset. They're really, engaged and are putting themselves at risk for the project. And so it really benefits and behooves everybody to bring the most efficient and innovative ideas to the table early so that those can be incorporated. And as the relationship builds, which is something that we pride ourselves on, is building those long-term relationships with our customers, we can continue to iterate. We can continue to evaluate those innovations that we tried to implement on the project. Did they achieve the levels of returns and the value proposition that we had expected? And then how do we take that to the next level and take that and iterate again on the next project? And having those relationships with customers, having those relationships with suppliers is critical as they're developing new projects, as we're looking at new things and bringing everything to the table and really, understanding what are those things that we're going to focus on and how we do that. And as Ash was talking about, I really think that this is going to play a significant factor in how we identify and implement sustainable solutions as we try to reduce that 40% footprint from a carbon perspective across the globe on these construction projects. There's a lot of technology out there that we could implement today, but there's a lot of technology that might not even be developed yet. So innovation and sustainability are going to have to go hand in hand as we look at research facilities, as we look at universities, as we look at suppliers, to really take us to the next level and provide those solutions, get them across the line from a code committee perspective to enable us to use them. And then it's going to be on us to prove the value, not just from a cost and schedule perspective, but from a sustainability impact perspective. And so we've got to all come together as a team to be able to implement these solutions that are going to drive us in the direction that Ash mentioned. So thanks so much for the question. I'm really excited to be here and look forward to further conversation.
Thanks, Keith. Ernie, how are you seeing suppliers on board within the advanced work packaging framework? What are some of the strategies being used? And could you provide a specific example of a supplier application where they have been able to meet specific data or other project production and delivery requirements?
Yes, absolutely. First, what I'll do, I'll echo Keith in that, some of the key strategies with early engagement is being involved with the design teams, being involved with the constructability teams, and the operations team. That does, those three factors don't always come together. So the example that I'm going to share today is the Houston Northeast Water Purification Plant. This is nearly a $2 billion progressive design build that's undergoing construction still in its phase 2. It was a Jacob CDM Smith joint venture, and the product was our dynamic movement joint in sizes from 48-inch to 96-inch. So this is a significant piece of equipment. Design started in 2017. From nearly the beginning, we were talking to the civil and mechanical design teams. We started to negotiate the PO for the product February 2019, had a PO in July. There's a multi-million-dollar PO. So this enabled us to confirm our production queue. The owner bought off on the early procurement package as an advanced work package as a piece of engineering equipment. And one of the keys here was them having a contractual mechanism that allowed for early procurement and payment for stored materials. Not all contracts have that provision. So we were continually working with the design teams as the design moved from 30% through to 100%. So we placed the PO in July of 2019. The first pieces shipped in February of 2020. The shipments took place from February of 2020 through April of 2020. We worked with our local distributors to store the material off-site, 48-inch and to 96-inch pipe. It's pretty significant pieces of equipment. So we needed a good local place to store because there was so much activity on site, we didn't have storage on site. During the same period of time, we were doing training for installation on these pieces of equipment because some of the installing contractors weren't familiar, which is another key aspect of the advanced work packaging, is that your teams can engage with the vendors and work through installation issues, work through training issues. And fortunately, we have a large facility in Houston that we were able to bring all the installation teams with 5 different installing contractors and do training on the exact equipment that they're going to be installing. The first install was in March of 2020, so it was a month after our first delivery. Project and installs are still going on today. 25 of the 27 dynamic movement joints are currently installed. Key factor in this by using these practices, by using these best practices in advanced work packaging, there were 0 delays that were related to the equipment that we early procured.
All right, excellent. Thanks for the specific example. Okay, now let's go to our Q&A. Allison, we have a couple of IPD related questions for you. The first one, what do you suggest to allocate risk between the parties?
Yeah, so I think you really do need to understand that scope of work to be able to understand how to allocate risk, right? So the parties need to be upfront looking through it and who's taking what in that scope of work. And then, it's again, I think the whole team here has said this on the panel is you have to work together and really understand the scope and understand who's best fit to do that scope of work. And sometimes that is giving up some of that work to another party that's involved in this collaborative approach. So really, when you get down to the risk, you can mitigate a lot of risk just by having all the parties at the table.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Allison, we'll come to you with this next one too. Regarding collaborative approaches like IPD, in my experience with partnering with risk and reward sharing, the most fierce resistance and hard skepticism comes from very experienced project and construction professionals with both the owner and the contractor. Any thoughts on how to proactively overcome this resistance and effect the necessary cultural change to favor collaboration?
Yeah, it's usually it's a hard sell with certain people for sure, especially when they've done it a certain way all the time. And that was one of the key items that I kind of had laid out at the very beginning. When you know that you have some of those kind of the tough resistors, it's the education piece. It's being, laying out facts with where we're performing today, what is going on in the industry, getting some industry benchmarks, or using the CII information that they have here, the research data, and then really walking that person through. And it could be like one-on-one and showing them what the tools are and the data behind, how this can improve things. And then I think it's going back again and again, and it's not a simple solution, and it takes a lot of time. And we did have resistors for sure in our group, but I think once they started into the process and working, having the ability to, have a contractor right there at the beginning in the planning, so they knew that we were going to get the right constructability around it. I think that was the selling point for those resistors. And really, it is being patient and knowing that change is hard for people, especially if they've been doing something the same for decades.
Yes, thank you.
I think there's a way to have these conversations with everybody on the team that makes people less resistant. A lot of that is just about your approach and your attitude and your ability to collaborate together and sell things in a positive way. I mean, you've got these schedules, they exist for a reason. Make sure they're accurate, make sure we're having those open dialogues with everybody, on the team as a collaborative process. And you can maintain that enthusiasm outside of the resistance you may get a lot of times, I think.
Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe I can just add, I really love what Alison said. Education is very important, but on top of that, what's really important, even if we have the right solution that will solve and bring us the world peace, I think it's important that we need to understand what is the current pain point for those people. We cannot just try to sell something, but rather than we need to understand if our solution truly fits into their pain points as of today, and then saying, hey, with this solution, we can solve this. And on top, we can bring even more added value.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Ash. Patrick, let's go to you with this one. In a world of KPIs, how do you measure the success of supplier engagement? How can suppliers educate the supply chain professional to go beyond the standard metric of minimizing cost and focus on risk mitigation? And can you share an example?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, I just think, in a broad sense, first of all, projects in general need a backup plan. In my experience, as part of your sort of KPIs as you're beginning that project work. You have to be able to focus on things that can go wrong. Take your lessons learned from your projects prior, make sure you're utilizing those things, and understand your supplier deliverables. I mentioned earlier on the call that a lot of times in the project business, you're out there and you're dealing with these suppliers, but you're only focused on, one scope, for example, and you may not be quite as aware of the deliverables that some of these suppliers can bring to the table and the relationships that they have on your project or projects that you've worked on previously, and those relationships that they might have. Taking advantage of those, I think is super important, in terms of measuring success of that engagement. It's not always based around cost solutions. Of course, it's about supply chain solutions, when you're going to get your product, how it is they manage their schedules. And that's part of the risk mitigation process. It's important to have that engagement process with the suppliers throughout the project. And sometimes early on in a project, you can often kind of disregard some of the steps that you've made. You have to be, proactive in that regard. You have to continually have these conversations with your suppliers. And just because you have, a contract locked in somewhere doesn't mean you don't need to go back and say, hey, what's going on with this? We need, consistent updates, et cetera. I think that's an important part of the process.
Okay, thanks. Would anybody else like to weigh in?
I have one little addition here. It's correct in a world of KPIs to measure success of a project, and now with sustainability there are new KPIs and metrics coming. And I think what's really important that make sure that you work with your suppliers and standardize all these metrics, because especially when it comes to sustainability, one of the obstacles that we are seeing today is there is no standardized way of measuring the success of sustainability of a project, of a company, of your supplier. So try to create this, sharing environment so you all set within the same supply chain, the same metrics. So when it comes to the end user and customer, you can all show actually what has been improved or what has been the real impact when it comes to environmental sustainability.
Thanks.
I would just offer that we need to make sure that internal EPC metrics aren't in conflict with overall project goals. And for the most part, they aren't. But sometimes EPCs can, run their own silos, and procurement is giving a bill of materials to procure. They haven't always engaged with the engineering implications or the constructability, or constructability has a high ability to influence decisions and influence purchase decisions. You have to balance. One vendor may be less cost on the bottom right-hand corner, but they might be a longer delivery time, which requires different installation parameters in the field. So I think the simple statement that I can make is if supply chain is engaged early on, lead times usually aren't an issue, because you're able to factor that into your overall design and incorporation of your materials.
Okay, thanks, Ari.
Mike, I was going to do it. I think from the metrics perspective, we got to be careful not to ask for too much too, right? We got to make sure that we look for the right amount of information and data, and look for the information and data that doesn't have to be generated outside of what's normally generated within the businesses of the suppliers that we're working with, right? So what are the natural things that we can just ingest from the suppliers without them having to go and gather additional information and get, do calculations or whatever, or input into our particular system. I think that as we get into the sustainability discussion, like Ash was talking about, there's going to be a lot of different metrics and a lot of different asks as we start to figure out what we're going to track and how we're going to track it. And so I think that this early engagement discussion is just that much more critical to align on what are those deliverables that we need from you, not just from a design perspective, but from a overall metrics and performance perspective. And that way we can make sure that we're not asking for too much and we're not putting too much onus on the suppliers to give us what we need.
All right, thank you.
Can I
Go ahead,
jump in?
Allison. Sure.
Okay. So so many great points there. And I think for me, just with the experience on the one ITPD project we did, like that early supplier engagement, it gave us a reduction in scope changes. It was so impactful because if people have the opportunity to input into scope design and really, really understand the owner's requirements about what they're looking for, it gives them that opportunity, right, to get the scope and all the requirements right because they're working on it together. And when you really understand the scope and the technical requirements because you're right there at the front end, then the measure of success is really reduction of contract change orders, improved cost and schedule certainty. You reduce your non-conformances because you're not doing reworks in the field and things like that. So overall efficiency and quality goes up for the supplier and the owner. Like I think it's a huge win-win. So there's a lot of KPIs there that you can measure, not just the general cost. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you. Keith, let's go to you with this next one. Can you address the issue of both engineering technical supplier engagement along with commercial supply chain engagement? Are they equally important? What issues does this present?
Ooh, that's a really good question, right? Because I think a lot of times you have to have a combination of both, kind of what I was mentioning before. If you have only the commercial engagement, then you're selling, you're trying to get sales, right? So it might not come off as if you're considering all of the other parts of the delivery model that you're affecting, right? So I think that bringing the technical part of it is critical to engage with the right people at the right level of the project, whether it's engineering, procurement, or construction, that have a say in the technical side of the fence. And then the commercial side of it is also important because at the end of the day, the solutions have to provide value, and you have to be able to evaluate it against some sort of metric or against some sort of baseline or previous experience, right? So I think that having the right balance is really important. I think that the technical approach has to be started early and really taking a look at what are the things that we want to go accomplish, what's the level of effort to get there, to get it incorporated into the project, how do we ensure we communicate that to the right people in the downstream activities of procurement and construction. But then on the commercial side, it all has to be assessed at the same time. So when a project makes a final decision to say, yes, we're going to go ahead with this widget, all of the commercial kind of discussions need to have taken place. So I think that there has to be the right balance. I think if you come in too commercial, then it feels too salesy. If you come in too technical, then you miss the boat on the overall value proposition. And so I think that if you can try to balance that in some way and feel out your customer and feel out the people that you're working with, then that will help greatly.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, Ernie, let's go to you with this one. Is there any reason not to engage procurement and suppliers and contractors at the same time? In other words, including procurement as part of the team?
I'm assuming that we mean the procurement with the EPC firms. So in that aspect, no, there's no. I mean, procurement serves a very valuable function within the capital projects. My earlier comment is we need to make sure that they don't get so siloed and they have their own KPIs that are in conflict with the rest of the team. There are several innovative products and vendors and subcontractors that are out in the marketplace that need to be engaged early because of the value that they bring to the project, and it can affect constructability and design issues. So they definitely are all part of the team in transparency and communication, because the supply chain is the one that's going to have the most current information as it relates to the innovations in the product, the delivery to the marketplace, regional issues that may affect production and production capacity as well. And all of that information, as Keith said, all of that information factors into the risk profile of the project.
Thanks,
I think
I also think,
oh, go ahead.
Real quick, Ernie, I think when you're talking about that, a lot of times on the technical side, you have people who have been doing business or dealing with certain products in the industry for a really long time. And if you're not careful, you can lose sight of other innovations that other suppliers are bringing to the table. And sort of that is a supply chain role, to pay attention to those opportunities that are out there that may benefit the project on certain areas. And so making sure you're collaborating with the technical team, your engineers, about what else is out there for the needs of the project. I think that's critical. That's an area that can sometimes be overlooked. And I think that's a level of expertise that, the supply chain side of things can bring to the table on a project level. Allison was talking about understanding the owner requirements and the scope of the project. Well, supply chain needs to also have that same sort of understanding for what's going on with the customer, with the owner requirements, and then bring possible solutions as well to the technical team who may not, who may have just by happenstance been doing business with this one product supplier for a decade or so. You get stuck in habit sometimes with what it is that you've been doing, and you forget that there is so much innovation out there, especially right now, and not to forget that. I think that's a real critical component on a project level.
Yeah, no, I would say any time that you leave one of the groups out, you're destined for failure, right? I mean, if you think about how critical the supply chain is in the overall delivery and execution of a project, thinking through the advanced work packaging process, the materials getting to site and getting to the work phase are at the top of the list, right? So if you can't work with your procurement team up front and get information and get buy-in and ensure that your metrics are aligned to drive the overall delivery in the field and to drive the overall delivery of the project for your customer, then things are going to get out of sequence. There's going to be metrics that drive different decisions in the procurement side of the fence than what supports construction and what engineering had assumed. And it's just a recipe for a not successful project. And so aligning at the beginning with an understanding of what your key metrics are, what's the overall goal, we're implementing advanced work packaging, this is the required on-site dates, what are the ones that you see issues with, how do we work around and mitigate those things? And if you don't have that constant conversation and constant collaboration going on with the project, you're getting off on the wrong foot. So I think that you have to bring in procurement from day one. You have to have an understanding and alignment with the entire project team. And if you have that, you can really drive change and really drive success.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Allison, let's go to you with this next one. Have you seen that supplier engagement via I2PD has provided longer and more reliable quote validity? For instance, have you received bids that are good for 60 to 90 days rather than, the typical 1 week that we've been seeing lately?
I would say that the validity, like I2PD is a very long contract, right? It's a multi-party agreement that, the suppliers have signed on to. So, their pricing on it, if it's over a number of years, they've added in what that escalation might be over those years. And we've had conversations around it. And a lot of times it'll be, okay, well, when we get to a few years out, we will look at it again. So when I look at this as a bid is good for 60 to 90 days rather than 1 week, my experience with I2PD is on very large projects. The suppliers that were in it, I think they had reliable quotes that stood for longer than 90 days, I would say. So I can follow up with some of the vendors that were involved with us on that because they were doing a lot of the procurement and behind the scenes for us. But I can answer that question. I'll follow up with some of the suppliers that are involved in the I2PD model with us and let you know for bids that they were receiving on parts.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mike, I can offer an example here. I do, a lot of my focus is in the municipal water wastewater space in large projects. And what we're seeing in some of the CMAR and progressive design builds, and I see several questions in the chat here about risk allocation, so I can kind of provide a holistic answer here. Back in the slides, overwhelming said that the project risks need to be shared. And so what we're seeing a lot, just specific with escalation, is we're being asked to price projects as of today, not to guess what the 6-month escalation is going to be, not to guess what the 12-month escalation is, with some, what have you experienced in the last 12 months, last 18 months. So with that point, with that spot pricing and the future guidance, all of that gets pushed into a project risk and managed at the project level, instead of me providing my best guess at escalation to a subcontractor who then provides it to the EPC, who then provides. So then you get these stacked levels of risk upon risk upon risk upon risk, and an owner may wind up paying more money for risk. That, again, going back to transparency, collaboration. In the old days, we used to assign kind of a master risk percentage for escalation that covered everything. Now we're hearing a lot of our customers that are going line by line through their bid of, we think the risk here is X%, this risk here is 2X%, and that's how they're managing. So that's another tool of being able to manage some of these supply chain risks.
Thanks, Ernie. Ernie, let's go to you with this next one. There's a perception in the industry that engaging your suppliers early will give them an unfair competitive advantage. What do you think?
Well, I'll be a little provocative and maybe say that I don't think that transparency is an unfair advantage. I'm a big version of one version of the truth, and making sure that everybody's operating off of the same information. Of course, having a better understanding of the project and being engaged earlier can be an advantage. I've been a project director in a past life prior to joining Victaulic, and I can say nearly every time a late engagement has led to questions, it's led to redesign that could have been avoided. We had a project with odor control. It took a long time for several reasons to decide on an odor control vendor, and unfortunately, each one of the 3 vendors that we were evaluating, they were different sizes. They had different electrical requirements. They had different piping requirements. And we were far enough along in the design that once we made the decision and decided odor control system B, we had to make changes to the design. We had to go back and do read work, where if a lot of that information had taken place up front and had been shared with all of the vendors up front, we might have had a different outcome a year into design. So I don't think that we call it an advantage, and I think that kind of goes back to our some PTSD from the hard bid days of not wanting to share anything from the perception of giving somebody an advantage over somebody else. But if everybody's getting the same information and putting their best foot forward in what's best for the projects, I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that early engagement is pretty critical, because, again, it's a conversation that a lot of people aren't having, but there are a lot of new people in the market, in the business out there, that are providing new insights and have these relationships that you can take advantage of. And in the project world, the projects are dynamic a lot of times. I mean, you have to be able to pay attention to scope change, and things like that are always, almost always going to happen, depending on what it is you're working with. But that early supplier engagement, it allows everybody, I think, in the business to take advantage of what everybody's strengths are and the relationships that they may have, and how it is that you can piggyback off of them, not just for cost savings, for example, but also for project efficiency, timeline deliverables, et cetera. So, I think it's important. I don't think we have to worry about it nowadays like we used to in the past, for sure. So that's just my 2 cents on that one.
And I think, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because we are a government entity being OPG, but you can still engage suppliers very early in concept phases and still have that competitive RFP process. It's just your evaluation criteria is different, right? So it'll be based more on, are they technically capable Do they have the proper quality plans associated with that type of work? What's their historical performance? And then like kind of some unusual ones, like, you know, evaluating them on collaboration and integration. Like, have they done this kind of thing before? Are they willing to be transparent with costs? Because that's the key, right? Are they going to open their books so you know what they're paying and then what their markups are, et cetera, right? So it's, and also, you know, how flexible is that company to work with the owner and suppliers and being transparent like that? So it's different evaluation criteria, but you can still have an RFP process and bring them on board really early. And you'll know their labor rates and their markups and overheads and all the rest, right? So you can make sure that you're getting your best value, right? And you're comparing vendors. So I would say you can definitely engage suppliers early and have a competitive process. It's just that estimate that they give you as part of the proposal, expect it to be refined, right? As they start to work together with you and the other suppliers, that collaboration, you know, as you go through concept and validation type phases. So it's possible is my answer.
Thanks, Allison. Okay, there's been a lot of discussion about procurement integration. Can you speak to integration challenges with engineering, including bringing engineering on board to new ideas and approaches?
I can speak to that. So I think as you look at new technologies and you look at things that are bringing that are hopefully going to bring value to your projects, I think one of the most difficult things is it takes effort, right? So there's additional effort that's required to change what we've done in the past, kind of what Patrick was talking about. You get comfortable, right, in what you're speccing out and what you're trying to do, and you've got a certain amount of hours that you've got in the budget, and so how does that benefit an engineer, and how do we encourage the engineers to come to the table from a technical perspective and see the value to the overall project and really take that next level effort to promote and get the design across the finish line so that they can leverage the value of whatever it is that we're trying to incorporate within the project that we're working on now. But how do we develop the guides and the deliverables that are required to transition this to other projects within the company, I think is one of the biggest challenges that we have, because it's not a minimal effort. It takes effort. And so, getting the right person with the right motivation is really critical.
Okay, thanks. We're almost out of time, but I have one last question, 10 to 15 seconds each. If you could do one thing differently tomorrow to improve collaboration in the supply chain, what would that be? Patrick.
Yeah, I think, take your lessons learned from all your projects and make sure you're evaluating that for your early engagement on projects going forward.
Thanks. Allison?
From the owner's perspective, I would say, really improve your insight into your organization's procurement needs and the procurement strategies that you're going to employ. And then share. We kept saying transparent throughout this whole thing. Share that 2 to 5 year demand with all of your suppliers. And that is really early supplier engagement. It will help the entire supply chain meet the owner's needs. It improves, suppliers' strategies and heightens partnership. So we need to stop thinking one procurement at a time and look at it from an aggregate level over several years. And it helps the supply base. They can grow, pivot, and, the bottom line meet the overall needs of the industry. So it's transparency.
Great. Ernie?
Yeah, I think this comes down to risk mitigation through contractual risk sharing. Overwhelmingly, the entire project team, from the owner all the way through the supply chain, we want to share the risk. We want to manage it together, and that's going to provide the most effective outcomes. And CII research has proven it time and again.
Thanks. Keith?
This is a difficult one from my perspective. I really think that, really improving how we engage with suppliers from an innovation perspective is something that I would really want to, continue to look at. And if I could change one thing, it would be, getting engagement, across the industry and getting, I guess, more momentum around changing the standards or updating the standards to enable innovative solutions that are, going to promote, cost and schedule savings, but a lot of what Ash talked about in sustainability is going to be really, really critical over the next several years.
Thank you. And Ash?
I'm going to echo Keith, right? But I'm going to be a bit more concrete. I mean, one thing would be really implement one digital platform or system that we can increase this collaboration, but also transparency that we've been, talking throughout this panel. Because having this digital platform will enable not only between suppliers but through the full value chain, having the transparency but seeing the performance in one stop, in one place. That's why I always see and say that digitalization and sustainability goes hand in hand, because everything at the end is very much of data metrics that we need to follow through.
All right, thank you very much. In closing, our panelists are living what they preach and collaborating to transform the industry. And there are resources to help you tackle the way we work with our complex supply chains. The resources shown here are just a few in CII's extensive knowledge base related to supply chain management topics. We encourage members to download and implement these. And if your company is not a CII member, contact Jenny about becoming one. Join CII, join the Supply Chain Management CBA, and start collaborating. You also see a supply chain research project on the screen. Talk with your Board of Advisors representative to be nominated to participate on that research team. It will take all of us working together to change our industry for the better. What will you do tomorrow? Thank you to all of our panelists. Appreciate it. You guys have a great day.